Oh, hi. Welcome to my virtual lab. The name slips. You know, ever since I first built this place, I've intended to use it to look into fragments of the media multiverse that have mostly been left unexplored. But even as someone who is passionate about finding these hidden treasures, somehow I'm still able to find contentment in the familiar. Case in point, gay singing rocks.
Are the crystal gems? We'll always save the day.
If you've ever seen me online within the past 8 years, then it's probably no surprise to you that I love Steven Universe. Since the very beginning of its run, I've been intrigued by how this sci-fi tune of out-of-this-world proportions can feel so down to earth, especially with the way it portrays everything from relationships to identity to even anxiety, all coupled with a fresh fantasy edge. Also, they sing sometimes, and it rules. Now, I can positively say with no doubt in my mind that, for most of my young adult life, this was my show. Though admittedly, it wasn't without its pitfalls. While I generally don't have a problem with the show taking a break from its wacky space lore to focus on more human stories, as it only makes sense to focus on both halves of our hybrid protagonist's life, the way that this thematic shift is implemented can often feel very hit or miss. Like, a lot of the time we could transition from fun gem stuff to just as fun human stuff, but other times they would just as easily make that human stuff not as interesting and slow down the show's momentum as a result. And I feel like this issue, alongside the obnoxiously long hiatuses, are a big reason why during most of Season 4 and the start of Season 5, I wasn't as engrossed with the show as I was before. While there were still some shining moments during this period, I felt that, for the most part, the show just wasn't grabbing me as much, and I think there's a more significant reason behind it. What made Steven Universe really stand out in my mind as something remarkable was its ability to surprise. Whether it was through leaving clues in plain sight that build up to a big reveal, or carefully establishing a status quo before flipping the script when we least expect it. The build-up and payoff of those revelations was truly a magical sight to behold, which, I might add, complemented the show's underlying theme of change quite nicely. However, with the show's pace seemingly moving slower than it ever had before, it felt like it was going to take something extraordinary for this magic to excite me once again. But then, on January 5th, 2018, at 7:45 p.m., the 12th episode of the show's 5th season, titled Jungle Moon, premiered. And on that night, I was greeted with one of the most engaging and unique adventures the show had put out in a long while. But before we talk about this gem of an episode, let's go over some logistics. For starters, the original series contains 154 episodes, each of which vary widely in terms of focus and how they contribute to the show's overall narrative, if at all. But to make things more concise, I've decided to sort them into 4 different categories. We've got the character-based episodes, which focus on developing specific characters, as well as fleshing out their backstories, personalities, motivations, and so on. Considering how the show emphasizes character growth as one of its main themes, it should come as no surprise that this is the category that most episodes would fall under. In a similar fashion, there are other stories that tend to focus less on the story of Steven Universe and more on Steven's universe, expanding upon the world that the characters inhabit and introducing new concepts to the show's surrounding lore. Though these world builders are present throughout the series as its world gets larger, their presence can most notably be seen in Season 1, where a lot of the show's core concepts are first introduced to the viewer. While both of these categories can be tied more directly with the show's main story, there are other episodes that tell more self-contained, linear stories that can more often than not be watched outside of the context of the underlying narrative without much confusion. Though these were often written off by fans as filler, due to a bulk of them focusing on more minor, often human characters, they could still be plenty of fun to watch, when done right at least. And then, there are the big ones, which consist of the most important points of the show's main story. While each of them may vary in tone, from epic and action-packed to low-key and atmospheric, they all manage to deliver some of this show's most defining moments. Of course, many episodes might not even fit into just one category, and some might even fit into all 4. And I'd argue that's exactly the case with good old JM here. Now, I know what you're thinking. You might be thinking, Slippo, how can one 11-minute episode manage to fit in all of this criteria at once without being such a stupid, ugly mess? Well, rather than trying to do everything it seeks to accomplish all at once, each element of the episode's plot is presented across a 3-act structure, which makes it have a solid sense of cohesion and helps it become consistently engaging to boot. Each of the 3 segments that make up this structure are interconnected in how they incorporate all 4 categories into the episode's narrative. And what better way to illustrate this than by going through each act one by one to see just what makes each piece of this machine work. So with that said, enough with the semantics. Let's jump, or in this case, crash, into the episode. Wait, what? Huh. Well, this seems appropriate enough. Let's begin. The episode opens directly where the preceding episode, Lars of the Stars, left off, with Stevonnie struggling to pilot a crashing spaceship, which was damaged by an attack from a homeworld gem. As we follow the ship's rocky descent, we start to see a bit more of the lush, vibrant environment below. This wild landscape, of course, is our titular jungle moon. And it isn't until Stevonnie first steps foot on this new world that the episode's premise starts to take shape. Right off the bat, the narrative setup is taken in a slightly different direction than we are used to from the Steve show, with much of it taking place in a location that we've never seen or heard from before, giving us no idea what to expect, and all without Steven no less. Well, yes, it might seem kinda arbitrary to point out how our main boy is absent for a full 11 minutes, but having Stevonnie as our central character this time around, when coupled with the new environment, really does enhance the feeling that we have truly stepped into an unfamiliar world. Of course, these surroundings aren't just new to us, but to Stevonnie as well, and this shared sense of discovery allows some common ground to be present between our main protagonist and the audience, essentially contrasting with the alien atmosphere that surrounds them. Speaking of aliens, oh boy, look at it! The designs of these new species are so striking and add so much character to the world, despite only 3 of them being present. And it's Stevonnie's various encounters with these guys that effectively establish their truly alien nature. Like, you know this ain't no homeworld when this scorpion dude gets sliced in half and just jumps back up with no problem. But what's also interesting about these interactions is that they illustrate how these creatures adapt to their environment. Whether it's through the sudden growth of its exotic plant life, or through the innate abilities of other, more sentient beings, it's clearly shown that this is a world where everything is able to find a way to get by, and in a way that's kinda beautiful. Before these encounters, Stevonnie was frightened by the weight of this situation, and understandably so. Being trapped in space, light years away from Earth with seemingly no help within reach is basically the definition of a stressful situation. But after witnessing life flourishing before their very eyes, they come to a rather motivating realization.
If life can thrive here, then so can I. I've just got to hold out till Lars finds me. Until then, we survive.
And survive they do, utilizing the practical nature of Connie and the forward-thinking attitude of Steven. Our once frenzied fusion becomes determined to create a temporary life in a world they've only discovered seconds ago. And their determination is exemplified through the development of a handy set of survival skills, all packed together in a neat little montage. Their progression as a survivalist is on full display here, evolving from the essential search for food and water to building their own shelter within a matter of hours. At this point, it seems like Stevonnie has grown fully accustomed to this new environment, and with this montage, we're able to adjust to it right along with them. As soon as this sequence ends and that cool atmospheric soundtrack fades out, we now feel like we know this place just as well as Stevonnie does. But little do we know, this land isn't all just large pears and lumpy boys. See, survival's all about the challenges. You know, those decisions in life that are never quite easy to make. Those moments that really demand so much from you. Those times that really make you wonder what to do next. Because if you're in Stevonnie's situation, if there's any challenge you have to be prepared for, It's birds.
Come on, we have to. We're out of energy bars. But it's so cute.
But make no mistake, this little guy escapes just in time for Stevonnie to confront a bigger challenge. A bigger bird.
And it's out for blood!
Luckily, life finds a way, as they find what appears to be a large observatory of sorts and retreat inside of it for safety. Well, granted, that safety isn't guaranteed, since this large lad would still be waiting for them outside. But a survivor makes do, as they set up a new shelter inside this abandoned tower. Now, the show doesn't make it explicitly clear what this big thing is right off the bat, just as Stevonnie doesn't dwell too much on it the moment they arrive. Because the only thing that matters right now is that they've made it through this new world unscathed. With this in mind, they can finally settle down and rest. They might have been off to a rocky start initially, but it's all okay now. They can adjust. You know, we've only been here a while, yet it feels like so much has happened already. I mean, all this exploration and survival stuff has felt so engrossing that it's kinda hard to believe that that was just the first 5 minutes. Heck, if this was just the whole episode, it would probably make for a solid adventure story on its own. But what makes this section even more interesting is the mystery it leaves behind. Notice how we don't seem to know the full story of some of the standout details of this place. The broken planet looming in the sky above. The mysterious yet somehow familiar observatory that Stevonnie camps out in. The episode takes its time to present them to us, yet it manages to keep their larger context under wraps. And that's the magic of the Jungle Moon. Just when you think you know all of its ins and outs, something new comes on knocking at your door to leave you curious about its true history. And you know what? I've actually been having my own suspicions about this very place as well. I don't know if my mind is playing tricks on me or whatever, but I've been having the strangest feeling that nothing here is what it seems.
Sweet dreams.
Yo. Where'd you put me this time? Really feels like I should know this place, but I can't seem to. Oh, it looks so trippy. And did my hair look good in that pose? So I really should focus this time. I'm really not being Wait a minute. This is my voice. And these are my personal thoughts. But why would my own simulation know exactly what was in my head? Unless... This is my head! Of course, I'm dreaming! It all makes sense now! Maybe I could use my initial confusion of this situation to help set up the general vibe of Jungle Moon's fantastic second act. Great idea, me! Now, to show you what I mean, we'll first have to establish the show's history of dream sequences up to this point. Dreams have always played a major role in Steven Universe, and what exactly that role is really depends on what episode they're presented in. They could play a crucial role in an episode's standalone narrative, like in Kiki's Pizza Delivery Service, or they could be responsible for sending entire plot threads into motion, as they do in episodes like Steven's Dream. But despite their varied significance, one thing remains constant. Most, if not all, of the show's dream sequences come from Steven himself. Well, to be fair, the show is built entirely around his perspective. If we're seeing the world through his eyes, it makes sense that we'd be able to look into his mind every once in a while. Most of the time, your casual Steven dream consists of a few common elements, most notably in the way they're introduced. We typically see Steven just sleeping in his room, before a brief transitional wipe whisks him away to the more fantastical world of his own vivid imagination. At least until the terror sets in. This tried-and-true formula effectively spotlights the stark contrast between the grounded familiarity of the real world to the exaggerated, more cartoony fantasy of the dream world. And in the process of making both realms so distinct, they also become defined by these unique qualities in the mind of the viewer. Now, granted, the show has only really dabbled with dreams on a few occasions within its first 4 seasons, but they've been implemented frequently enough for a simple, reliable formula to be developed out of them. But Jungle Moon stands out in this regard, because while its dream sequence does start with a transition from reality to fantasy, it really doesn't seem that way at first glance. See, despite acting as the reality in this situation, the Jungle Moon is still a fairly unfamiliar location. And sure, while we may be more familiar with this strange satellite now than we've had 5 minutes ago, there's still enough separating it from what we're used to that it could technically be considered a dream world all its own. Which begs the question, how do we contrast the fantastical with the fantastical? Well, the answer is simple. We don't. Our second act begins immediately as we smash cut to a sleeping Stevonnie emerging from a bright pink terrain, only to awaken to the strange, outlandish sight of Connie's living room.
What? I'm home?
Rather than being dropped into the usual surreal wonderland that one would expect from a dream, we're instead greeted with the ordinary comforts of Earth. But despite this dreamscape's clear departure from the abstract, there's still something about it that feels a little uncanny. Like, I can't help but feel that something's a tiny bit off here. I don't know, I think I might need a short while to think it over. They're small, okay? Stevonnie is small. Or is everything around them just really large? Well, in any case, this sudden return home definitely feels more cryptic than it does cozy. Even more so if you consider how it's not as apparent at first that it's all fake. And once we see Connie's mother, Priyanka, emerge from that very same carpet, the viewer is already left with their mind practically racing. Come on, now this has to be a dream. I mean, all this Connie-specific imagery has to have come from her side of Stevonnie, right? Well, I don't know, it certainly feels more real than any other dream we've seen.
Yes, I know there's organic life on the surface. It's an invasion.
Wait, Connie's mom seems to be talking about some kind of invasion. Is this some kind of vision on Earth? Is this happening right now? How is Stevonnie not realizing how small they are? What is Steven thinking of all this? As all of this is stirring through our collective minds, our newly petite adventurer is left completely oblivious to the pure strangeness surrounding them. Instead, Stevonnie's sole focus is on getting the attention of the towering Priyanka to find out just what the heck she's up to, and it seems like the closer to her they get, the more the truth starts to unravel.
No, I will not repeat myself.
Wait, that sounded like... And those must be...
You and your crew, myself.
Hey, Mom, what are you doing?
It is? What?
Please, give me a moment.
And just like that, the scene has shifted. What was once a modest human house has now transformed into a gigantic diamond base, complete with saucer-like spaceships hovering just outside its glass walls, while Dr. Maheshwaran, now taking the form of the malevolent Yellow Diamond, sits sternly at its center. Now, as weird as it all may seem, this transformation actually provides a subtle bit of disclosure regarding one of the more perplexing aspects of this bizarre stream of consciousness, that being Priyanka herself. When we first see her surfacing from the carpet, we catch her in the middle of a pretty heated phone call. But since we are viewing it from Stevonnie's perspective, we can only really hear one side of the conversation, thus leaving the exact context of the call incredibly vague. Heck, even the things we can gather from her ambiguous remarks about organic life and demands for destruction only leave us more curious. And while Priyanka may be too busy arguing with her anonymous client to give Stevonnie any answers, It's through her continued dialogue and inflections that we, as the audience, are able to piece it all together. Everything from her impatient, authoritative tone of voice to her eventual threat of shattering the collar are enough to make her true identity almost unmistakable. And it only takes a simple gaze into her eyes to confirm the viewer's suspicions. And thus, we now know that all along, we have been witnessing not Connie's mother, but Yellow Diamond, organizing a fleet of homeworld ships to turn a thriving planet into yet another gem colony, and directing it all from a base situated on its moon. Now, naturally, this realization doesn't answer all of our questions. If anything, it brings up a few more. But strangely enough, despite this confusion, we can't help but feel a small tinge of relief at the same time. Because in a situation like this, where there's just so much that's up in the air, it feels so gratifying to have at least something figured out. This mild relief doesn't last long, however, as unbeknownst to us, things are about to get weird all over again. Sure, everything that has happened so far may have already thrown us for quite a loop, but trust me, this episode is about to throw us for the biggest loop of all. But first, let's turn our focus to Stevonnie for a moment. Back in part 1, I pointed out how they act as a sort of common ground with the audience, in that they are the one familiar element present in an otherwise unfamiliar atmosphere. This, when combined with their attitude towards the situation, give them a sense of relatability to us, which prevents the drastically different scenery from feeling too disorienting, as the both of us explore this alien habitat for the very first time together. So far, Part 2 has presented us with nothing but drastic changes, to the point where entire locations and characters are transformed just like that. So how exactly does our grounded protagonist respond to all of this chaos? Well, they do what any curious adventurer would do, and not question any of it.
Hey, Yellow.
Oh, you're still here.
What are you doing?
I'm commanding the dropships to colonize this planet.
I want to command a dropship!
In an instant, the inquisitive Stevonnie we followed since the episode's start has shifted instead to a Stevonnie who is oddly excited about the annihilation of a life-filled planet, to the point where they demand that Yellow Priyanka give them one of their own.
I want one now!
Like a driver taking their hands off the wheel, it seems that our one source of sanity and direction through all this madness has suddenly succumbed to it, leaving us all alone to feel nothing but pure confusion as the scene unfolds. Well, maybe they're just fooling around. But why would they do that here, with Yellow Diamond of all gems? Speaking of, Yellow seems to be treating their presence so passively, almost as if they know who they are. Where even are we right now? Is this like some alternate reality? At this point, we are truly at a loss as to where this episode is going. What with all of the unexpected changes in both setting and characterization, everything just feels like it's all falling apart and spiraling out of control. Yet as we try and make sense of this madness all by ourselves, the sheer intensity of it all just keeps on rising.
You have so many worlds and I don't even have one! It's not fair! I want one!
Okay, this isn't just weird anymore. This is flat out jarring. Are they consciously acting like this?
I want my own army!
Is there something controlling them?
I want my own planet!
Heck if I know, but whatever it is, it really feels like all of a sudden, Stevonnie has become someone entirely new.
I deserve it! I'm just as important as you!
Then why don't you act like it, Pink?
Pink. Just one word, and all of our confusion comes grinding to a halt, as we instantly realize that we are not witnessing the present, but rather the past, and that Stevonnie's tantrums aren't theirs, but rather pink diamonds from thousands of years ago. Out of all of the diamonds that have been mentioned on the show up to this point, Pink was probably the most elusive, as we really only knew two major things about her. One, she was responsible for Homeworld's colonization of Earth, and two, she was supposedly shattered by Rose Quartz in the Gem War. Yet from this vision, we are able to glean a lot more about who she truly was, and what significance she had amongst the Diamond Authority before her so-called demise. and what we find here is rather intriguing. While Blue and Yellow are both intimidating authority figures who don't let anything get in the way of their galactic conquest, Pink doesn't seem to share that same power and influence. And what we're left with is the impatient, overexcited, and immature child represented through Stevonnie's actions. Considering what we know about the Diamond's role on Homeworld, it's surprising to learn that a figure who was supposedly a mighty, oppressive tyrant had only lived in the mere shadow of her larger superiors. And come to think of it, there's a certain feeling of insignificance that permeates the dreamscape even before Pink's perspective takes over. Remember, this dream is a result of both Steven and Connie's collective subconscious, and as such, fuses together components from their respective human and gem-related memories, as evidenced through the gradual scene transition from Connie's living room to Yellow's moonbase. What's interesting to note, however, is that while both Priyanka and Stevonnie do transform into diamonds about halfway through the sequence, the power dynamic of their relationship remains constant throughout. Within the show's first 2 seasons, we learned that Connie had been subject to an overbearingly strict upbringing, largely on the part of her mother's overprotective nature and restrictive discipline, which made Connie feel like she had very little agency over her own life choices. In the dream, this imbalance of power is illustrated through the massive size difference between both familial parties. Stevonnie's small stature makes it easier for Priyanka to ignore them to the point where they have to climb up to the windowsill, then onto her shoulders just so she can hear them, which is symbolic of the extra work it takes to communicate with such a stringent parental figure. This dysfunctional relationship is also demonstrated through Yellow's disregard of Pink's emotionally charged ranting, though the power struggle present here appears more literal than figurative. Pink's lower status amongst her peers, despite being an all-powerful diamond, says a lot about her attitude towards this position. She feels like she should be treated as an equal to Yellow, Blue, and White, but due to her childlike immaturity, she is treated as less of a priority to the ruling class and as more of an afterthought, which is an especially frustrating prospect for someone who wields just as much power as her superiors. If Connie's portion of the dream captures what it's like to feel small, then Pink's portion captures what it's like to be small. Yet in both situations, size signifies authority. But this thematic similarity isn't the only thing that bonds these two visions together, because although the dream is split into 2 halves, they aren't split evenly. And this fluidity is perhaps best demonstrated by Priyanka's gradual transformation into Yellow Diamond. From the very start of the dream, the giant figure we see rising from the ground may look and sound like Connie's mother, but her dialogue fully embodies the impatient demeanor and harsh demands that only Yellow could make. Despite this, it's only shortly before we shift to the moonbase that we hear her address Stevonnie as Honey, emphasizing Priyanka's status as a human mother while still simulating the presence of a diamond, a dual identity of sorts which is then translated visually into her physical appearance. This new design depicts Priyanka wearing Yellow Diamond's uniform, which may sound simple on the surface, yet it remains effective in showing us where Connie and Pink's perspectives overlap. Instead of having the 2 parts of the dream act completely distinct, elements from both parties' memories appear to bleed into each other, which displays how through fusion, rather than being locked to their own perspectives, Steven and Connie are able to experience one shared stream of consciousness. It's the combination of these overlapping memories and the different perspectives that Stevonnie embodies within the dream that add up to a surreal experience that remains consistently engaging as it is surprising, especially upon first viewing. While it does feel like a bit of a departure from the survival adventure story that was set up at the beginning of the episode, this sequence manages to capture the idea of being stranded in its own meta sort of way. Think about this. When Stevonnie crashed on the moon, they were dropped into a situation where everything was new to them, and they were left completely on their own to figure it all out. Fortunately, their curiosity and forward-thinking attitude prevailed, as they eventually came to understand this new world a lot more within their journey of survival. Once they fell asleep, however, we were unknowingly transported into their mindscape, an even stranger environment that eerily distorts and changes when we least expect it, and our emotional connection to Stevonnie becomes lost, as they slowly start to become someone drastically different. In a sense, the episode has suddenly left us isolated and confused in the same way Stevonnie was. Yet not unlike the perils of our protagonist, we remain intrigued enough to push forward and find out what all of this chaos is leading up to. But perhaps what's most amazing about this sequence is that even after it's left us with all of these questions and all of this confusion, just one word is all it takes. And suddenly, we get it. Whoa, that was a lot. My head hurts. Guess that's what having nightmares does to you. We were just hit so hard with all of that lore development through the lens of the chaotic and abstract that it feels so relieving to wake up and make sense of it all in a more grounded reality. On the surface, it may seem like nothing much has changed about this place while we were asleep, but it's our newfound understanding of this faraway moon that transforms it from a fantastical wonderland to a historical artifact lost to time and reclaimed by nature. Though I'm getting ahead of myself, let's see what Stevonnie makes of all this. As they fall out of their hammock, they too are taken aback by the cryptic events they have just witnessed, embodying their individual components to fully process the situation.
Steven, what was that? Diamonds. I'm having diamond dreams again.
The curious, determined Stevonnie we know and love has returned to finally bring more sense to their surroundings after the dream world left us to sort through all of its chaos alone. That isn't to say Stevonnie wasn't really in the dream at all. They were, just not consciously, letting their unconscious mind and Pink Diamond's memories take hold of their dream self. And just like us, the only thing they could do was witness this strange vision from the past through the eyes of the gem who lived it. But now that their conscious self is awake again and more puzzled than ever about what they've experienced, our hero decides to further explore this mysterious structure for answers. To their surprise, the observatory's top level reveals the same exact place where Pink and Yellow argued in their dream, proving that this base was in fact put in place by the diamonds, which leads another, much darker conclusion to be made about the body this moon orbits.
That must have been a colony.
The mystifying, hollow planet that greeted us in the sky when we first landed was once a thriving ecosystem inhabited by organic life long ago, which was completely drained and diminished by the gem homeworld to further the Diamond Authority's galactic conquest, leaving only its neighboring satellite to outlive it. In a story that has so far embraced the prevailing human instinct of survival, the brief glimpse that we have of this planet's history gives us a reality check of sorts, telling us that as much as life could thrive, life could just as easily die at a moment's notice, especially if its very source ceases to exist. In Stevonnie's case, they may have proven themselves to be a skilled survivor, but their real life is on Earth, and mere survival can only get them so far in this bizarre land. Knowing this, they use the tools they have at their disposal and the diamond knowledge they have gained from their dream to try and get in touch with Lars's ship, to which they succeed and... You know what? I don't think I really need to dramatize what happens in this part of the story as much as I did the other parts. While I do find it fitting how the survival theme comes full circle as our journey ends, the final minute of this episode plays out in a pretty straightforward manner, all things considered. Stevonnie manages to contact Lars, the funny Birdman tries to get its revenge on them by breaking through the glass dome only to get shooed away by Lars's lasers. Stevonnie gets to go back home safely, all is well. On paper, this description makes the episode's ending seem rather underwhelming, as it doesn't leave as much of an impression as the rest of the episode did. But what it lacks in fireworks, it makes up for in the relief and closure it brings to our journey. Between exploring a vibrant jungle filled with strange new creatures and getting lost in a trippy dream world that coalesces into a symbolic flashback, this episode has already given us a lot to chew on. so it's actually rather convenient for the show to give us a moment to breathe as it wraps up this story. It doesn't try to be too laid back in this approach, though, if the sudden return of our favorite bird is any indication. Their presence sets the stage for a final brief moment of action before it floats away, giving us one last reminder of how amazing natural life can be. Godspeed, my friend. Now, from the looks of it, it seems like everything is concluding quite nicely. The major points of this episode have come full circle, and its main story was given some satisfying closure. But despite tying up these important threads, many unanswered questions are still left up in the air for first-time viewers. Why did Stevonnie get those visions from Pink Diamond's past? Why did the moon base initially feel familiar to them?
Have I been here before? No, that's ridiculous.
Was this simply brought about by Steven's empathy, or is it something else entirely? While these questions are not overloading us like the ones in the dream world, they're still crawling at the back of our minds, just waiting to be answered. They will eventually, as this 11-minute adventure is just a small part of the show's larger story. But as it stands, Stevonnie has clearly had enough excitement for one day, though before setting out, they take one last look at the window Pink cracked, possibly pondering the same questions that we have about what all this could mean. The sense of finality and subtle ambiguity of this closing scene leaves our journey both complete and incomplete, for as we close the door on this story, many more are left wide open to keep us guessing and reflecting, even after the credits roll. The possibilities for the future may be extensive, but if one thing's for certain now, it's that Steven and Connie are still alive to experience it. Braving the wilds of distant space has proven itself to be a worthy challenge for the two, and even they have no idea what other challenges the future may hold for them. But rest assured, the capability they demonstrated in the face of these unexpected circumstances shows just how much Stevonnie has grown, not just as a person, but as a relationship as well. Knowing this, they walk away from this experience motivated with the confidence that no matter what obstacles come their way, they can survive, they can thrive, and they can adjust.
Let's get you up here and back home through my head.
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go home.
Phew! Now that was exhilarating. Now I may have overdone it a little with the whole traveling into my mind thing, but hopefully now you can see what I mean when I say that Jungle Moon is one of the most creative and thoroughly engaging stories to ever come out of Steven Universe. It may start out as a simple, self-contained narrative about Stevonnie striving in the face of isolation, but once its second act comes bursting in, the episode proves that there's much more to it than what it was initially letting on, leading into a flashback sequence that ties into the show's larger story. While this could have been presented as simply that, the show knows that what it's revealing is so significant that this couldn't be just any old lore dump. And what we get instead is a mind-bending experience that reflects on the nature of power dynamics in two different character relationships. All four major elements of an average Steven episode are combined together fluidly within the span of its 11-minute runtime, which is a feat that definitely isn't unheard of in the history of the show, but here it's accomplished in a way that feels different. From its very start, we're introduced to both a fresh new landscape and a central focus on Stevonnie rather than Steven, which already tells us that we're in for a drastic yet welcome change of pace. And as the story progresses, even more changes to the show's formula start to come into effect. The decision to introduce its dream sequence in a more understated manner may not seem too significant, but it makes all the difference when you realize what this episode is trying to do. By first introducing a narrative about a character being stranded in a strange world, and then having that character enveloped in a stranger world to the point where they seem to become one with its strangeness, it's like the show's telling us, okay, you've seen how intense isolation can be. Now it's your turn. With this premise, they could have easily made its execution completely frustrating for the viewer. but instead, the episode's pace flows naturally enough so that it leaves viewers on the edge of their seats, not knowing what's gonna happen next, until that one simple reveal gives them practically all the answers they need. And while the show is no stranger to occasionally putting its audience off guard, up until this point, it certainly hasn't been done quite like this. On first glance, a casual fan might see Jungle Moon as just another reveal episode. Significant enough to be important, though not as significant as what would come later in the story. But upon closer inspection, it stands as a brilliant exercise in sci-fi writing that applies its themes directly to both its protagonist and the viewer in a way that feels so unconventional. In fact, this episode is such a masterclass in regards to its thematic cohesion that it's no wonder that it ended up being one of the few Steven episodes to be nominated for an Emmy. Too bad it lost to this.
Papa, the loading locker, the red menace. Ask any girl to say I ain't got a micro penis.
Oh. But regardless, if there's one major takeaway that I could grab from Jungle Moon, it's that it's emblematic of the show's ability to take risks and go beyond what's expected of it as a sci-fi action cartoon for kids. From its refreshingly positive representation of LGBTQ relationships, to its more diplomatic approach to solving major series-wide conflicts, Steven Universe has clearly had a knack for breaking all sorts of conventions. And when it's willing to break a few of its own conventions in order to tell an engaging, smart, and suspenseful story like this one, it still manages to stay true to the charming blend of humor and heart that makes this show so unique. And above all, I think that's why I keep coming back to these gay singing rocks. Even though I've seen practically every episode and know about everything they've been through, I have found that, especially as I get older, there's always something new to discover about this show. Whether I'm introduced to new ways of thinking about its characters, or I'm looking back to iconic moments with a broader perspective, the fact that it has stuck with me even a year after it ended proves just how impactful it's been to me. It may not be the most perfect cartoon out there, but it's certainly one that will have a special place in my heart for years to come. And there's so much more about this show that I could just go on about, but I think I've just about hit my Steven quota, at least for now anyway. Besides, how can I stick with talking about just one universe when there are practically thousands, if not millions of others, just waiting to be discovered? And well, for an interdimensional being like me, my work is never done. So until we meet again, I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you in the multiverse.